The first time I drove up to my new property, the tires crunched over the gravel road like an announcement. I'm here, deal with it. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, throwing golden light across the sprawling ranch. The air smelled like fresh earth and pine, quiet, almost sacred. I inhaled deeply, imagining mornings sipping coffee on the porch without anyone's rules pressing down on me. Little did I know, freedom has a way of attracting trouble. I was hauling boxes from the moving truck when I first saw her. At first, I thought she was a visitor. Well-dressed, perfectly coiffed, red blazer sharp enough to draw blood, glaring from the distance. Then she raised her hand, pointing like she was about to perform an exorcism. I froze. "You can't live here," she barked as she marched toward me. Her voice had that insufferable combination of authority and entitlement that makes you question your own sanity. "This is an HOA area. You have rules. You follow them." I blinked. "Actually, I don't. This land isn't in your HOA jurisdiction." My words were calm, but inside I felt a tiny thrill of rebellion. Her eyes narrowed. "Not in the HOA? That's irrelevant. Everyone abides by the community's standards." I laughed quietly, because honestly, what standards could apply to someone who didn't technically have authority over me? "Ma'am, these standards end at the HOA boundary, which, as it happens, is right over there." I gestured vaguely toward the road's edge. She tilted her head, lips pressed thin. "We will see about that." And just like that, she stormed off, her heels clacking like gunshots on the gravel. I shook my head, muttering to myself, "This is going to be fun." For the next week, I settled in. I explored the property, unpacked boxes, and tried to ignore the occasional glare from her SUV parked conspicuously at the far end of the HOA road. But it was clear she wasn't just going to let me enjoy my property in peace. Then came the warning letter. I found it nailed to my front gate, a perfectly typed HOA letterhead document, full of legal jargon, threats, and questionable grammar. "Cease and desist the unauthorized occupancy," it read. I chuckled, imagining her sitting in a conference room, red pen in hand, circling words like a general planning an attack. But here's the thing. That road that passed through my property was their only access to the far side of the HOA. I didn't block it, not yet. But the thought planted itself quietly in my mind. If she's going to make my life miserable, maybe it's time she felt the inconvenience. And as I closed the mailbox and watched the sun dip below the distant hills, I realized nothing about this was going to be simple. The calm, quiet ranch life I had dreamed of was already a battlefield. And somehow, I had a front row seat. It started innocently enough. A little sign here, a temporary gate there. I told myself I was just marking boundaries. But sometimes, small actions carry enormous consequences. I woke up one morning to the sound of gravel crunching, tires skidding over dirt. My stomach sank. Through the kitchen window, I saw her SUV inching down the road like a predator. And she wasn't alone. Her face twisted with fury. And behind her, a small caravan of HOA board members, clipboards and frowns in tow. I poured coffee, trying to stay calm. "Morning," I called, stepping onto the porch with a casual wave. She didn't respond. Instead, she stomped up the driveway, her stilettos slicing the gravel. "You will remove that gate," she shouted, pointing at the small wooden barrier I'd installed the night before. I sipped my coffee, eyes narrowing slightly. "Oh, that's technically my property, and I do get to control who drives across it." Her nostrils flared. "You can't just— This is outrageous. People have rights. You cannot block the road." I leaned against the railing, letting a hint of sarcasm slip through. "I suppose you could drive through my front yard, but the landscaping is very delicate this time of year." She gasped, like I had personally insulted her entire family tree. "This is a community. We all follow rules. You're causing chaos." At that moment, a board member whispered something to her. I couldn't hear it over the sound of her fuming voice. But the message was clear. They were planning an escalation. I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about property lines anymore. This was about principle. I walked down the driveway and gave the gate a firm push. It clicked into place perfectly. The barricade wasn't permanent, but it was symbolic. And as soon as it was closed, the silence that followed was exquisite. Her face turned beet red. She slammed her clipboard down on the hood of her car. "This is illegal! I'm calling the sheriff! You'll regret this!" I leaned casually against the fence post. Please do, I've got time. She stormed back to her SUV, muttering threats that sounded more like a curse than legal action. I watched her drive off, tires kicking up dust, fury trailing behind her like smoke. The ranch felt different after that. Empowered. Dangerous. And just as I was savoring my little victory, I heard it. The low rumble of an engine, and the unmistakable crunch of heavy tires against gravel. Coming from the other end of the road, I froze. And then, slowly, the unmistakable sight emerged. The HOA, armed with chains, blockers, and a look that said, "We are not leaving without a fight." I realized then, with a mix of dread and amusement, that I had just escalated a full-blown war. By the third morning, the quiet of the ranch was gone. Birds avoided the trees, dogs barked nervously, and even the wind seemed hesitant. I could hear the distant rumble of engines before I saw the convoy. A small fleet of HOA SUVs, pickups, and one overly aggressive golf cart, lined up at the end of the road like an army ready for battle. I stood on the porch, coffee in hand, feeling the absurdity of it all. People are really losing their minds over a gate. "Good morning," I called, trying to inject cheer into the chaos. Not that anyone seemed capable of recognizing it. The Karen, officially now Commander Red Blazer, jumped out of her SUV first, clipboard swinging, face a perfect storm of fury and disbelief. "You've gone too far this time," she screamed. "We're calling the police! You cannot deny access to the community!" I raised an eyebrow, tilting my head like a cat inspecting a mouse. Funny. That gate has been here for 3 days, and no one's been denied access. Except to drive across my property. Which again is mine. Her nostrils flared. She spun to one of the board members. "Why is she still here? Why aren't we enforcing the rules?" The board members shrugged helplessly, as if the logic of private property had never occurred to them. Then came the negotiation phase, what I now refer to as the HOA opera. Threats flew like arrows, promises of lawsuits danced in the air, and at one point, I think I heard someone suggest a community meeting at my front porch. I smiled. Please, let's make it official. But just as things were reaching a fever pitch, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. From behind their vehicles, a couple of neighbors emerged, looked like they were curious, but also wary. They whispered among themselves, glancing at the barricade, then at me. Some nodded subtly. Some, I suspect, thought I was crazy. Karen's rage hit its peak when she realized the neighbors weren't jumping to her side. She turned, pointing furiously. "You can't side with her. This is a community violation. Everyone has rights." I sipped my coffee again, savoring the moment. Rights to what? Cross my property uninvited? That's news to me. Then came the moment that made my heart skip. A delivery truck pulling up behind the barricade, stuck, engine idling. Karen's jaw dropped. She opened her mouth, probably to scream, but no sound came out. And in that silence, the absurdity of it all settled in. A red-blazered Karen, a small army of HOA enforcers, and me, standing behind a wooden gate, holding nothing but stubborn defiance. And coffee. I realized then, it wasn't just about a road anymore. It was about power, pride, and the pure, unadulterated chaos that comes when someone decides to challenge the rules of the perfect little HOA world. And as Karen's screams escalated to a new decibel level, I felt a mixture of dread and dark amusement. The storm was coming, and this time, there would be no easy way out. The morning of the final confrontation arrived like a bad movie set. Foggy, tense, and slightly surreal. I stepped outside, expecting Karen and her HOA brigade to be camped out with pitchforks and protest signs. Instead, there was a quieter, more dangerous energy. The entire road was empty, suspiciously empty. I took a cautious step toward the gate. Then I heard it, a horn blaring from the far side of the property. One of the HOA SUVs had stalled trying to turn around, and their shouts carried across the valley like cannon fire. Karen appeared, huffing and sputtering, clutching her clipboard like a life raft. "This is insane! You can't just keep them out forever!" I folded my arms, enjoying the symmetry of the moment. I never said forever. Just until someone respects property boundaries. Her face twisted in disbelief. "We are a community. You're tearing it apart." I shrugged. "Funny. I think this is exactly what you were tearing apart before I got here." Then came the subtle coup. Neighbors began emerging, cautiously at first, then with confidence. Some cheered silently, others took pictures. A few waved politely. It was clear the tide had turned. The battle had become more public than Karen had anticipated. One of the board members, who looked increasingly uncomfortable, muttered, Maybe we overreacted." Karen froze. "Overreacted?" she shrieked, turning on him like a viper. It was cinematic in a way that made me smirk despite the tension. The raging Karen, flanked by a disheartened HOA, the stalled vehicles, the murmuring neighbors, and me, calm, composed, and quietly victorious. I decided to push the advantage, walking slowly toward the gate, making a show of unlocking it. "I'm willing to negotiate access," I said, keeping my tone deliberately neutral. "As long as it doesn't involve trespassing on my land or threatening my family." Karen opened her mouth, then paused. For the first time, her red blazer didn't scream confidence. It hung like a banner of defeat. After a long, tense moment, she finally backed down. Not gracefully, oh no, but she backed down. The HOA reluctantly agreed to reroute their access, and the gate stayed where it belonged, firmly on my property. The aftermath was surreal. Silence, then scattered applause from the neighbors. I leaned against the porch railing, taking in the smell of the ranch, earth, pine, and victory. Later, when telling the story, I realized it wasn't just about a gate or a road. It was about boundaries, standing your ground, and sometimes letting someone's fury become their own undoing. Karen would probably find a new hill to scream on, but for now, the ranch was mine. Quiet, free, and a little wiser. As I sipped my evening coffee, watching the sunset paint the fields in gold and orange, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. I'd won, not just a gate, but peace, sanity, and the sweet, cinematic satisfaction of watching a Karen implode on her own terms. And deep down, I knew. This story would be told for years, in HOA circles, whispered with horror, in my family, laughed at with glee, and on YouTube? Well, let's just say it was perfect content. Felt that tension? Smash like, if you believe ordinary people can push back against outrageous control. Subscribe to Karen Edition to catch every story of real-life justice and neighborly drama. And tell me below, how would you handle a Karen like this?